So welcome to NEET Crash Course Biology. Now we will be discussing chapter overview or synopsis of plant growth and development. Now how do you define growth? Now growth is considered to be a very important characteristic of all living forms. In plants, especially during the period of growth, the initial period of growth is referred to as the vegetative growth. That is when the plant increases in its size, it grows in its size, it grows in its number of cells, and it starts attaining sexual maturity. And when it attains sexual maturity, we say that is the time when there is flowering and formation of fruits and seeds. The word development involves two important processes. Whenever we say that there is growth and development happening, it would be growth as well as differentiation. Now, growth means, like I said, it could be an increase in the number of cells, it could be an increase in the size of the cells. Differentiation is where a cell starts performing a specific function. The factors that regulate these processes, there are a lot of internal factors and lot of external factors. Internal factors, like for example, just like we have hormones in our body, even the plants have certain growth regulators. And external factors are like, for example, you have temperature, you have sunlight, lot of other environmental factors that play a very important role in growth. What is exactly growth? How do you define growth? You can define growth as an irreversible permanent increase in the size of an organ. It could either be the size of an organ, like how a fruit starts increasing in its size from unripe to ripened condition, or it can be an increase in the size of an entire plant, or even in terms of a single cell, it could be an increase in the size of the cell. All of you, please remember, growth is not only with respect to size or length or area or volume, but it could also be an increase in the number of cells. But one should remember that growth is something that is irreversible and a permanent increase. See, you can see how the plant is going through different stages of its life. It starts off as a tiny seedling, and then it becomes a primary plant body. The primary plant body is actively undergoing vegetative growth, and then finally, after it starts attaining a certain state of vegetative growth, it starts developing floral primordia, and then ultimately we say that the plant has stepped into its sexual period, its flowering period, or its reproductive period. In case of plants, how is growth in case of plants different from animals? In animals, growth happens only up to a certain stage in life, but in plants, growth is a continuous process. Like even a tree, a very very old tree, say for example a 200-300-year-old tree, also continues to grow in its width or its girth, isn't it? And it's developing new leaves every now and then, it's flowering every season. So what is happening here is growth is happening continuously in it, and this is what is referred to as indefinite growth. How it is indefinite, or it is also referred to as indeterminate type of growth, and it is very different from what we see in case of animals. Now, how these plants can grow indefinitely like that? Because I am sure you all are aware that plants in their body, they have a special group of cells which are actively dividing, and this special group of cells are referred to as the meristematic cells. So please remember, meristematic cells are those cells which are very very rich in cytoplasm. They have a distinct nucleus, they are they have a very thin cell wall, they're actively dividing, they have cytoplasmic connections between each other. They are not performing a specific task yet, their only job in the plant body is to keep increasing in number. This kind of meristematic tissue, you can find it in the shoot apex and in the root apical meristem. After a period of growth in dicots and gymnosperms, now in dicots and gymnosperms, after a certain period, the plant will start increasing in its thickness, that is its girth, and that happens because of a special type of meristems that are located along the lateral sides of the body of the plant, which are referred to as the lateral meristems based on their position. And please remember this process that takes place, and this converts the non-woody stem in the case of plants into a woody stem, and this process is referred to as a secondary growth. So basically it is not just vertical growth always, sometimes there is horizontal growth also, as in the stem starts becoming thicker and thicker because of this process referred to as the secondary growth. The most important meristems which are involved, the lateral meristems, you have learned this in morphology of flowering plants. anatomy of flowering plants. That is the cork cambium, which is located in the cortical region, and the interfascicular cambium located within the stele, that is inside the endodermis. And both these meristematic tissues add secondary xylem and secondary phloem. Of course, cork does not add secondary xylem and phloem, it adds only cork tissue and secondary cortex, whereas interfascicular cambium, as you all are aware, it adds secondary xylem towards the inside and secondary phloem towards the inside. So what is basically happening is more and more cells are being added, and as a result the thickness of the stem will increase, and the thickness of the stem is what is referred to as the girth of the stem. How do you measure growth? Now, there are different parameters that can be considered in measuring growth. We can say increase in fresh weight, increase in dry weight. Fresh weight is you're taking into account the weight of water that is present within the plant body, and dry weight is you're drying the plant body completely. So, dry weight only talks about or only gives you the weight of the biomass, that is all the biomolecules or the organic matter that is present in the plant body. Or you can see increase in length. If a plant has increased in its length, that means it has grown. Increase in area, say for example you're calculating the area of a leaf. If the area increases, that means you know that the plant has grown. Increase in cell number, say for example you're counting the cells which are, say you're growing a tissue in the lab, a plant tissue culture, and then you're growing the cell number, and that also can be a sign of growth, isn't it? An increase in the cell volume. For cell number, you can say root tip cells. The root tip meristems are, say for example in a maize root tip, each root tip meristem is adding about 17,500 cells per minute. So you can see that per minute there is an increase in cell number by 17,500 in the case of a maize root meristem. And cell volume, like how in a watermelon, when the watermelon starts increasing in its size, the cell is known to increase in its volume by 3,50,000 times. So in terms of cell number and in terms of cell volume, what are the major phases of growth? There are three major phases of growth that we need to learn. One is, if you take a root tip for example, the cells are actively dividing, that is called meristematic phase. Okay, then after they divide, now during the meristematic phase, I had told you they have a very prominent nucleus, they have a vacuole, they have a dense vacuole, is less in number, they have a dense protoplasm, their cell wall is very thick, it's only primary wall, there is plasmodesmata between the cells, their only goal is continuously to keep dividing, and then later they have done with their division, they will start elongating, the number of vacuoles will increase, their cell wall become thicker and thicker, secondary cell wall thickenings are laid, and ultimately the cell stops dividing. It is very important to note that during the maturation phase of growth, in say for example the root tip or the stem tip, that is the root apical meristem or the stem apical meristem, after a certain point the cell stops dividing. You may ask why it stops dividing. That means the cell wants to do or wants to perform a specific function. When a cell has stopped dividing and it starts performing a specific function, we call it the maturation phase. Another word is given for maturation. We say that the cell has decided to undergo differentiation. It says that I am done with dividing, now I am going to sit and I am going to perform a function that is called as differentiation. So three major phases of growth. Now this is specifically with reference to either the shoot apex, which contains the shoot apical meristem, or it is with respect to the root apex, that is the root apical meristem. Now growth rate increases in two ways, that is either arithmetic growth or it is geometric growth. Now I will just simply explain what is arithmetic growth. You have a cell undergoes mitosis, it divides into two daughter cells. Okay, now in arithmetic growth what happens is one of the daughter cells will stop dividing, whereas the other daughter cell will retain its divide, it continues to divide. Okay, so remember that when out of the one daughter cell, out of the two daughter cells, one daughter cell decides to give up on division and one of them continues to divide, then we call it as arithmetic growth. In geometric division or in geometric growth, what you have is, if a cell divides into two cells, both these cells continue to divide, they don't stop division here, both of them keep dividing, then you can imagine each one will give rise to two cells, and then you can imagine if all of them continue to divide again, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16. So that is called geometric growth. Whereas in arithmetic growth, if one cell divides, one of them is the one that continues its journey of division, whereas the other one says no division, it stops to divide, and it says, so no division, and then it starts, probably it acts as a reserve cell. When time when the situation demands, it may start dividing, but at the moment one of them have decided not to divide, and so we call this type of growth as arithmetic growth. Okay. The mathematical expression for arithmetic growth is LT is equal to L naught plus RT. LT is, say, if you are studying the length of the root or the length of the plant, that is the plant as it keeps growing taller and taller. LT is the length which has been achieved at a particular time t. L naught is the length that it had at a time 0 in the past. So length at time 0, length at time t, and R is the growth rate, or per unit time, say per second or per minute or per day, how much growth is happening, that is called as R. Okay. Now you can see the geometric growth rate, how a geometric growth rate is so different. Now a geometric growth rate will give you a sigmoid curve when you plot the growth rate with time. See here, you have taken the growth, that is size or weight of the organism, along the y-axis, and along the x-axis you have taken the time. As the time increases, you can see that the growth follows a sigmoid curve. Initially there is a slow phase of the growth that is referred to as the lag phase, and then suddenly the growth increases as the number of cells increase. This sudden spike in growth is referred to as the log or the exponential phase, and after that there is attainment of a plateau or a stationary phase. Can you think and tell why there is attainment of a plateau or a stationary phase here? That is because probably there is not enough resources available for the cell. So when the resources have become minimum or the resources have become limited, then the cells will stop dividing, and as a result the graph attains an asymptote, which is referred to as the stationary phase in the growth. Okay, so this is in the case of a geometric growth rate. You can see a sigmoid curve over here in geometric growth rate. And for exponential, geometric growth rate is also referred to as exponential growth rate. For exponential growth rate, you can see that there is a different expression, that is W1 is equal to W naught into E raised to the power RT. Now here again WO is equal to the initial size. Say for example, if you take the weight, if you say W is equal to, or W is for weight, so the initial weight at time what? At time t is equal to 0, and after a certain time, say for example time t1 has passed, then you will measure the final weight, that is called as W1. R is the growth rate, that is how much per unit time, per second or per minute or per day, how much of growth has happened, and T is the time that has passed, isn't it? Say you are measuring the growth rate after 10 days, then T is the 10 days, isn't it? And then E is the base of natural logarithms, and R is referred to as relative growth rate whenever you consider growth rate with respect to an initial parameter, per unit initial parameter, then it is referred to as relative growth rate. Say for example, initially there were say 5 cells, okay, and then later there were 10 cells. Now if I ask you to find out the growth rate per unit initial parameter, you will consider initially there were 10, now there are 5, so you will say 10 divided by 5. So for all the initial 5 cells, the growth rate is 2. So there is 2 per cell per initial, so 2 per cell out of the initial, how many were there initially? Out of the initial 5 cells. So 5 twos are 10. So whenever we talk about relative growth rate, you are taking the final growth rate and you are expressing it with respect to each unit of the initial parameter. So per cell, how much has each cell contributed to growth? Each initial cell has contributed to 2 units of growth. As a result, 5 twos are, this is more or less theoretical actually, but you want to find out how much each initial unit has contributed to the final growth. So basically if you say 5 cells has become 10 cells, how much has each cell contributed to the growth? Each cell has contributed 2, so it becomes 5 into 2, that is equal to 10. So you have to divide it by the initial parameter, then only it becomes a relative growth rate. Okay. See here also, if you see initial growth rate, here the initial growth rate is 5 and later it became 10, isn't it? And here the initial growth rate is 50 and later the surface area of the leaf became 55. So by how much has it increased? If you see here, the growth rate has increased from 5 to 10. By how many units? By 5 units. Here also from 50 to 55, the growth rate has increased by 5. Now that is referred to as absolute growth rate. absolute growth rate is how much growth has occurred per unit time. So here you can say in this particular case, in both the cases, it is 5 centimeters square per unit time. So the growth rate in both the smaller leaf and in both the larger leaf is the same, because for a given time, say for example you are checking this in, say for example, about 1 month. So in 1 month the smaller leaf has increased by 5 centimeters square and the larger leaf has also increased by 5 centimeters square. But if I ask you to calculate the relative growth rate, what will you do? Now for relative growth rate, I told you you have to divide it by the initial parameter. So now the final growth rate is 10. How much was the initial parameter? 10 divided by 5. Here the final growth rate is 55. How much is the initial parameter? It is 50. So 10 divided by 50 will have a greater value in comparison to 55 divided by 50. So if you were to take the relative growth rate, which leaf has undergone a greater growth? It is the leaf, the smaller leaf has undergone greater growth in comparison to the larger leaf. But if you take the absolute growth rate, then it is the same for both, because both of them have increased by 5 centimeters square per unit time. I told you, if you consider unit time, say for example 1 month, so both of them have increased in their growth rate by, for example, about 1 month. And therefore if you consider the initial, if you do not consider the initial parameter, if you just take into account by how much the growth has happened, it is both of them are same. Now let us calculate the value for relative growth rate over here. 10 divided by 5 is 2. So growth has each or you can say that the value of the relative growth is 2. But here if you see 55 divided by 50 is 1.1. So which one is greater? Obviously 2 is greater than 1.1. So more growth has happened in the smaller leaf in comparison to the larger leaf, taking into account the initial size. That is, you divided it by initial parameter, that is 5, and here it is 50. So in which of these two cases have the initial cells contributed the most to growth? It is the smaller leaf. So you have to always study growth not only in terms of absolute growth rate but also in terms of relative growth rate. Okay. We have to understand terms called differentiation, de-differentiation, as well as redifferentiation. Now for example, there are actively dividing cells. We all know that the actively dividing cells are called meristems. Now when the meristems decide to stop dividing, so they stop division. Now the moment they stop division, they become something called differentiated cells. We can call them differentiated cells, or we can call them mature cells. They are no longer dividing. This process where the meristematic cells stop undergoing division in order to become differentiated or mature cell is referred to as differentiation. Okay, so they have stopped dividing, so now it is called as differentiation. Now imagine there is a certain situation that demands that this mature cell, which had until now stopped dividing, has to again start dividing, and it will start dividing to again give rise to actively dividing cells, which are called meristems. So I'm going to say here, it will re-enter cell cycle and divides actively. See, now because there is some situation that is demanding, so there is some situation or there is some condition. Let me just write that the situation demands that this mature cell which had stopped dividing will now undergo, again it will regain its capacity to divide, and it will give rise to meristem. Now this process where it regains its ability to divide is referred to as de-differentiation. Did you understand? So what had stopped dividing will again start dividing now because the situation demands, and that is called de-differentiation. Now imagine after it has entered into division, again it stops dividing. Until now it was dividing actively in the form of meristem. Now again it stops dividing. Now, when it stops dividing for the second time, we call it as redifferentiation. That means again it has taken up a certain job, a certain function, and it has decided that I am not going to divide anymore. Okay, so this is called redifferentiation. See the difference? So first you had meristematic cells, it divides and it stops dividing to become mature cell. This is called differentiation. The mature cell re-enters division. It starts dividing again to become meristem. This is referred to as dedifferentiation. Those meristematic cells which came from dedifferentiation, once again they stop dividing because they take up a task. They take up a function. This is called redifferentiation. So three major terms you have to remember here: dedifferentiation, differentiation, dedifferentiation, and redifferentiation. So here they have given a simple pathway for what the path taken by the cell during its course of life. So first we have, in the earliest plant, we have meristematic cells in the shoot tip and the stem tip. As the shoot and the shoot and the root keeps elongating, it will increase its cytoplasmic content, and the cell will decide, I am done with division, I am going to start taking up a function. It will differentiate, and before it differentiates, it has to also undergo expansion and maturation. Differentiation means it decides to mature. Now it becomes a mature cell because it has stopped dividing and it is now performing a specific function. Now the mature cell, after years and years, it will attain senescence or aging, and ultimately death, which is something inevitable, is attained, because ultimately the older tissues have to be replaced in the plant body. They have to undergo death and degradation. Okay, so this gives you a simple route that is taken by a cell, and we saw, and here also if you can see, they have connected the meristematic cell back to the meristematic cell, and they have labeled it as cell division, because the job of meristematic cell is to keep undergoing cell division and to keep forming more and more meristematic cells. Okay. Now there is a very interesting phenomenon that is seen in plants that is called plasticity. It is to develop different structures. Some plants develop different structures in response to different environmental conditions. Let us see what this plasticity is with respect to a few examples that is given in this slide. You can see the first example that is seen in a plant called larkspur. When the plant is a young plant, its leaf has a different type of a structure. When the plant becomes an adult, it has a different type of a structure. So during different phases of its life, it is exhibiting different anatomy, different morphology of its leaf. Same way, if you take a buttercup, those plants or those leaves which are usually on the terrestrial habitat, or say those leaves which are exposed above the level of water, they have this kind of a structure. And those leaves, as you can see, those leaves which are submerged in water, they have a highly dissected lamina, which is seen in this kind of a case, probably to make sure that the water does not to accommodate the water current. You can see that the leaf lamina is thrown into numerous projections like you see over here. So during terrestrial habitat, it has a different structure, and when the leaf is submerged in water, it has a different structure. So what you see here is, according to the environment, whether the leaf is above the level of water, whether the leaf is below the level of water or underwater, whether the plant is in its juvenile or its growing or its vegetative stage, whether the plant has become reproductively mature, whether the plant has now become an adult, based on all this, you can see that the structures are changing. Okay, so this is called plasticity in plants. Now we are going to learn about plant growth regulators. Just like we animals have a lot of hormones in our body, plants have a lot of hormones, and they are called as plant growth regulators, and they are the ones which regulate various activities in the plant. Some of them promote the plant growth, they are called growth promoters, and some of them negatively influence growth, and some of them influence, or when I say negatively influence growth, they may influence growth by causing aging, by causing you can say the fruits and leaves and flowers to fall off from the plant. And such growth regulators are called growth inhibitors, because they have a negative influence on the growth of a plant. Okay. See the different type of growth regulators. You have indole compounds, that is indole acetic acid. You have adenine. Adenine is a purine that is found in DNA and RNA. Adenine derivatives, that is 6-furfuryl-aminopurine, which is kinetin. Of course, kinetin has not naturally been isolated from plants, but a similar compound called zeatin has been isolated from corn. Then there can be derivatives of pigments like carotenoids, like abscisic acid, and terpenes, which are derived lipids, which are made up of repeated units called isoprene units, like for example gibberellic acid. And there are certain volatile plant growth regulators which are mostly in gaseous form, for example ethylene. So this slide is very important for your competitive exam, the category of the plant growth hormone to which it belongs to based on its chemical nature. Discovery of plant growth hormone. It was discovered for the first time, an experiment, a very interesting observation is mentioned, that is Charles Darwin and his son Francis Darwin observed the coleoptile. Coleoptile is a sheath which covers the shoot tip in case of monocot seeds, when the monocot seed actually germinates, and they responded to unilateral elimination. That is, if this is a monocot seed and if this is the stem that is coming out of the monocot seed, it is covered with a sheath which is referred to as the coleoptile. And when light was basically falling on only one side of this coleoptile, they saw that it started bending towards the light. And this, when I say light is falling only on one side, that is what is referred to as unilateral illumination. This was for the first time observed by Charles Darwin and his son Francis Darwin. So like I said, the tip of the coleoptile, which is a protective, a foliar sheath which covers the stem tip. Now this sheath which I have shown over here is the coleoptile, and this is the shoot apex that you see inside the shoot apical meristem or the plumule. And this coleoptile is known to respond to the unilateral illumination of light. Not necessarily light, it could be any artificial, not necessarily sunlight, it could be any artificial source of light. So see how it is bending towards the sunlight. So it was identified that it bends the coleoptile towards light, and this bending towards light is referred to as phototropism. It is a plant movement that is referred to, a directed plant movement, that is called phototropism. So see, this is the coleoptile. You can see the green colored, slightly green colored sheaths that is covering the shoot apex in the case of monocot seeds. And you can see how light is coming in from one side, and see how the coleoptile is bending over here. And when you remove the tip of the stem, that is the tip of the coleoptile, and you cover the apex of it, you can see that there is no bending. That means this coleoptile, the tip of the coleoptile, is very important in releasing some chemical which is translocated downwards to the stem. And this chemical, this growth regulator, is what is causing the bending of this coleoptile with respect to light. Because when you cut off the coleoptile tip and when you shield the apex, that is, you plug off the apex of the plant and you cut off the coleoptile tip, there is no release of this active principle. And because there is no release of this active principle by the coleoptile tip, you can see that there is no further bending observed. Similarly, in case of gibberellin, the gibberellin was a hormone first identified in a fungal disease that is called Gibberella fujikuroi, and this fungus was known to contain an active substance which was later identified to be the gibberellic acid. This was discovered by E. Kurosawa, who saw that some of the rice seedlings grew extremely tall. It is called foolish seedling disease because it is foolish for a seedling to grow extremely tall, because it will collapse in its own weight, and that's why it was called as a foolish seedling disease. And this was seen in the case of rice. It was called Bakane disease. Please remember, and this elongation, abnormal elongation, later was identified that these rice seedlings which showed abnormal lengthening of their internodes were basically infected with a fungus called Gibberella fujikuroi, from which they extracted a substance, an active principle which was identified to be a plant growth regulator, which later came to be known as what? Which later came to be known as gibberellic acid, or it is abbreviated as GA. Okay. F. Skoog and his co-workers, they observed that callus is an undifferentiated mass of cells that is obtained by tissue culture. They used tobacco stem segments or tobacco pith cells. That is, pith is the cells which are obtained from the core of the stem, that is in the core of the stele, the central cylinder of the plant. They saw that when they took these tobacco stem cuttings, the internodal stem cuttings of the tobacco, and they placed it in an artificial medium, they saw that the callus was growing only when it was provided with coconut milk, only with DNA, and sometimes they also provided extract from vascular tissues like xylem and phloem. And one more important thing was, it was when it was provided with extract from yeast cells. So then later they found that this vascular tissue extract or yeast cell extract or coconut milk or the DNA was basically rich in a kind of a substance that was later identified to be kinetin. Like I said, kinetin is not naturally synthesized in the plant. An analog chemical which is similar to kinetin, that is called zeatin, was later extracted from the corn plants. In the mid 1960s, independent research identified three major inhibitor substances. This is called abscissine. Okay, so basically they identified three major substances, that is inhibitor B, abscissine 2, and dormin. All of them were known to have similar functions, and they were grouped under the same group of plant growth regulators called abscisic acid. During the same period, they observed that another scientist observed that there was ripened oranges. They found out that the ripened oranges were somehow responsible for ripening of bananas. They identified that maybe the ripened oranges are releasing some volatile gaseous substance, which was later identified to be what? Which was later identified to be ethylene. Now, what are the naturally occurring plant growth regulators which we will be focusing on in this particular chapter? Auxins, gibberellins, cytokinins, abscisic acid, and ethylene. So let us start with auxins. Now, auxins naturally occurring in the plant body are indole acetic acid and indole butyric acid. Of course, there are synthetic auxins which are manufactured in the lab, which are not found in the plants, and you will be surprised to know that auxins was first identified in human urine, and it is obtained. The term auxin is derived from the Greek word that is auxine. Auxine means to grow, and like I said, auxin was first isolated from human urine. You will be surprised to know it's a plant hormone. How do we have it in our urine? Obviously, we eat plants, isn't it? We do have a vegetarian diet, and when we eat plants, probably the substance enters our body, it gets metabolized in our liver, and it is thrown out of our kidney in the form of urine, and they identified this plant growth hormone in the urine. And the synthetic forms are naphthalene acetic acid and 2,4-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid. So it's very important for you to know which are the naturally occurring auxins in the plant body, and which are the auxins which are found, which are obtained synthetically. And where do you find auxins in the plant body? In the stem, in the root, and in the leaf tips. Physiological effects of auxins: they promote elongation of cells, they promote apical dominance. Apical dominance is where the apical bud will not allow the lateral buds to grow closer ones. The closer lateral buds will not be allowed to elongate. So who is the dominating one here? The apical bud or the terminal shoot. Apical meristem is the one that is dominating. That is why it is called apical dominance. It also helps in differentiation of xylem tissue, especially vascular tissue, that is xylem, and also majorly not only cell elongation, but auxin also helps in cell division. Okay, and then it helps in all kinds of plant movement. It helps in parthenocarpy, especially parthenocarpy in tomatoes. So it is usually helpful in inducing parthenocarpy. I hope you know the meaning of parthenocarpy. That is formation of fruit without fertilization is referred to as parthenocarpy. So seedless fruits in tomato. It prevents abscission of, to be very specific, younger leaves and fruits and flowers, mostly leaves and fruits. However, it induces, it is important to know that auxin is not all positive, because there is a negative feature of auxin also. It induces abscission of what? Of older or mature leaves and fruits. Although it prevents the drop of leaf and fruit which are younger, but once the leaves and fruits become mature, it prevents them from falling off. I mean, it allows them to fall off from the tree. So we say that it induces, abscission means it gets cut off from the branch. So abscission it is induced in case of mature leaves and fruits in the case of auxins. And very, very important is it helps in root initiation, especially adventitious root initiation, which is what is very, very important in plant propagation. And this property is also employed in what? It is also employed in case of plant tissue culture. See, if you remove the apical bud, I told you, when as long as there is apical bud over here, so sadly these lateral buds are not growing. See, they're all sitting here. But the moment you remove the apical bud, now see how the lateral bud has started growing. So that means when the apical bud is there, the apical bud is the boss. It's not going to allow the lateral buds to grow. This is what is referred to as the concept of apical dominance. So please bear in mind that apical dominance means the apical bud, when it is severed off, when it is cut off, the lateral buds will take over, and this is what is one of the most important properties of auxins. Like I said, it helps in differentiation of xylem and phloem, that is vascular tissue. It induces parthenocarpy in tomatoes. It prevents abscission of early stage leaf and fruits, I told you, but in the mature or the older leaves and fruits, it promotes abscission. It induces rhizogenesis, I told you, in stem cutting, and it is used in plant propagation. It promotes flowering in pineapple, very very important point. Auxins promote flowering in pineapple. And very important is the synthetic form of auxin. In the beginning I told you, when I started talking about auxins, there is a synthetic form that is called 2,4-D, which is 2,4-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid, which kills only dicot weeds. It does not harm monocots. So remember, it does not harm monocots, but it only kills the dicot plants. And as a result, if you are a gardener, you can use it for your lawn, isn't it? Because you want only grass to grow in your lawn, and you don't want your lawn to have broadleaf dicotyledonous weeds. As a result, if you spray auxins, all the dicot weeds will die and only grass will grow over there, because it has no effect on the monocot. And the most important weedicide or a herbicide is 2,4-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid. The next one is gibberellin. Gibberellic acid is also a very important growth regulator. We have already discussed that it was first identified in the foolish seedling disease or Bakane disease by Kurosawa, isn't it? Now what gibberellins are? They are acidic, and we already learned that they had isoprenoid units. They are terpene compounds. They are mostly reported in fungi as well as higher plants, and different forms or versions of these gibberellic acids have been identified. The most widely studied form is gibberellic acid 3, okay, that is GA3. What do? They increase the length of stalk. Basically, they increase the length of stalk in grape. If the length of stalk increases, then the grapes can grow bigger in size and you will get more juicy grapes, isn't it? Sometimes fruits like apple can be elongated so that they can improve their shape, and in the market, if the shape is better, then you will obviously have consumers who get attracted to the apple and buy more of it. So horticulturists can use this gibberellic acid to enhance or to increase or to elongate the length of the apple to improve its shape. They delay senescence. One of the most important properties is it prevents aging in the fruit and in the flower, in the leaf, etc. Most importantly in the fruit. So if the fruit doesn't age very quickly, you can allow the fruit to remain on the tree for a longer period of time. That means, for example, the mango season ends during July and August, but if you allow the mango to be on the tree for a longer time, probably you can sell mango later by plucking it from the tree even in the month of August and September. So what are you prolonging? You're prolonging the market period of the fruit, because gibberellins will prevent or will slow down the aging of the fruit. So it is called delaying of senescence. It is used to hasten the malting process. That's why we say that it breaks seed dormancy. It breaks seed dormancy. As a result, and whenever the seed dormancy, as in, now you all have seeds placed in your containers in your kitchen, isn't it? And the moment you immerse it or soak it in water overnight, you can see that the seeds start germinating. So that germination is because the seed which was sleeping all along, the embryo which was in a state of inactivity, suddenly exhibits a spurt of growth, and it starts producing its radicle, which pierces out of the seed, and which is what you see in a sprout. That is brought about by gibberellic acid, and that property can be used in enhancing the malting process in the brewing industry. In brewing industry also, you use wheat grains, which is basically a seed, and by treating them with gibberellins, you can break the seed dormancy so that the seed becomes rich in a sugar that is referred to as maltose, that will allow greater production of alcohol in the market level, okay, in the commercial level. And you can also spray gibberellic acid to sugarcane fields. Imagine, I told you it lengthens the plant. So imagine if the sugarcane plant becomes taller and taller, it will have so much sugar in it. You can also produce so much yield of sugarcane, like say it increases it to about several tons per hectare, isn't it? And then by spraying juvenile conifers, which are pine trees, gymnosperms, juvenile conifers, when sprayed with gibberellic acid, attain maturity at a very early age, and therefore they can start producing seeds. They don't have to waste time growing. They can just become sexually mature at a very early stage, and you can obtain seeds very early in their lifetime. Okay. Promotes bolting. Bolting is where suddenly the internode starts elongating, and the seed and the plant, mostly the plant has a very short internode, but when you spray gibberellic acid, it shows an outburst of growth. The internode, the plant suddenly becomes tall and it starts it starts flowering, and this is seen in the case of beet and cabbages. As you can see here, this was the plant initially. See how the leaves were all arranged in the form of a crown called a rosette. Now see how the stem of the plant has become so long. This is called bolting, and as soon as it bolts, you can see how the shoot starts developing a floral primordium at its apex, and the flower starts differentiating. And this is seen in the case of plants such as cabbage and in the case of beet. The next hormone that we are going to discuss is cytokinin, the next plant growth regulator. Cytokinin, as the name itself indicates, cytokinesis is a part of cell division. So it is a plant growth regulator that stimulates cell division. So the moment you all look at cytokinin, I want you to remember that we are talking about cytokinesis or cell division. Okay. They were discovered by autoclaved herring sperm. Herring is a fish. By the fish sperm DNA, surprisingly, the DNA of the fish sperm was autoclaved. Autoclaved is a procedure that is conducted in certain wet labs in order to ensure that the biological samples are free of contamination. So you literally place it in an equipment called an autoclave. It is like a steam cooker, like a pressure cooker. You pressure cook the sample so that there is absolutely no microbe in it. So in such autoclaved herring sperm DNA, this substance called kinetin was identified. Like I said, kinetin is not found in plants, but a very close relative of kinetin, that is called zeatin, was identified in coconut milk and corn kernel. Corn kernel is nothing but the corn seed, the endosperm of corn seed. Okay. Cytokinins are synthesized, very important. Cytokinins are mostly synthesized by meristematic tissue, and they are usually found in the root tip, in the shoot tip, in the bud. Basically, all the growing parts of the plant body are involved in production of cytokinins, and they involved in cell division. We will go one by one here. Cell division, morphogenesis, that is differentiation, and then lateral bud formation, development of chloroplast, very important point. Cytokinesis, delay in leaf senescence, to be very precise. It makes sure that the leaf lasts, or the leaf is green for a longer period of time. As the leaf starts aging, it becomes pale yellow, and ultimately it undergoes necrosis, and it becomes completely brown and dies off, isn't it? But this cytokinin will ensure that the leaf stays green for a longer time, and it induces the opening of the stomata. There is a theory which says, a phytohormone theory, which suggests that a hormone cytokinin is responsible for opening of stomata during the daytime. Okay. They're produced in meristematic tissues. They help in cell division. They're used along with auxins, a very important application. I told you that auxin is a rooting hormone in tissue culture. So please remember, cytokinin is a shooting hormone in the case of tissue culture. That means if you apply, or in simple words, I will say auxin to cytokinin ratio. If you want shoots to develop, auxins to cytokinin ratio should be low, in the sense they should be higher level of cytokinin and lower level of auxin. Only then you can expect shoot to develop when you are growing a plant in a test tube from any part of the plant that is called explant, and that is what happens in the case of plant tissue culture. So the auxin cytokinin ratio should be low. That means we need higher level of auxin to develop shoot, and that's why we call cytokinin as a shooting hormone. Morphogenesis is, like I said, how the shoots take shape from the apical meristem. The roots take shape because they're involved in cell division. Obviously, they are involved in the root part of the plant also, but majorly in the shooting in the case of when I talk about the explant that you are culturing in a test tube or a petri dish, as in case of plant tissue culture. And when shoots and roots take shape from the apical meristem, we call that process as morphogenesis. It helps in growth of lateral buds, all the buds which are present along the sides in the angle of the branches, which are called the axial buds. It helps in overcoming the apical dominance. We saw that the apical bud is the boss. Here it takes over the boss and the lateral buds can grow when you spray the plant with cytokinin. They activate the lateral buds and they also help in growth of the plants laterally. This helps you in landscape gardening, because in landscape gardening you don't want the plant to become taller and taller. You want the plant to spread on the ground, and that is what is made possible because by spraying cytokinin you are making sure that the branches grow sideways, they elongate sideways and not just vertically upwards. So see here how the apical bud, if you remove the apical bud, you can see the lateral bud becomes active and it starts producing its own substance, which is referred to as the cytokinin that I told you, and then the lateral bud starts growing. So it helps in overcoming apical. Sometimes even in the presence of the apical bud, if you spray the plant with cytokinin, if you treat the plant with cytokinin, the lateral bud, this is the lateral bud, the lateral bud will start growing. That means in the presence of apical bud, it has broken the apical dominance. That is because of cytokinin. Cytokinins are known to promote very important. They help in development of new leaf and they help in maturation of chloroplast, and they also help in promoting the chlorophyll formation in the case of chloroplast. So they keep the leaves green for a longer period of time, and that's what I said, they will prevent the leaves from aging. When the leaves become old, they lose their chlorophyll, but application of cytokinin reverses the process by promoting chlorophyll formation in. So that's why we say delaying, to be very specific, delaying the leaf senescence is one of the important properties of cytokinins. Ethylene is the next hormone that we are going to discuss. See, ethylene, until now, whatever we discussed, that is auxin, cytokinin, and gibberellin, are all promoters, that is growth promoters. But now we come to the gray area where ethylene may be a growth promoter, it may be a growth inhibitor, because ethylene does help in growth in certain, it helps in flowering, it helps in fruiting, and all that, all good things it helps in. It also helps in bad things, like it stimulates falling off of fruit and flower, and it also promotes senescence, aging. So we can't really place it either as a growth promoter or a growth a growth inhibitor. So we can say that it has a dual role to play. It acts as both a promoter as well as a growth promoter, as well as it acts as a growth inhibitor. So it has a dual role to play. Okay, so I think this would best describe the role of ethylene. But we saw that ethylene was a gaseous hormone and it is synthesized mostly by aging tissues and ripened fruits. Ripening of fruits, enhancement of senescence, I told you, see, this is a negative feature. It usually allows the parts of the plant to become older fast. It exhibits a response called triple response. It promotes germination of groundnut seeds and sprouting of potato tubers. It helps in elongation of the leaf stalk or the petiole in submerged plants. Like for example, in villages you must have seen rice plants are completely submerged in water. Rice fields are flooded and the rice plant has to emerge from that flooded area from above the level of water. That is possible because of ethylene. It promotes formation of excessive or extensive root growth and root hair, and therefore it helps the plant to firmly fix to the soil and derive nutrition from the soil. Okay, ethylene is known to increase whenever a fruit is ripening. We see that there is a spurt in the rate of respiration, and respiration spurt that is seen during the ripening process is called the respiratory climactic. Okay. So respiratory climactic is nothing but a process in which we can see a process where there is an increase in the rate of respiration as the fruit starts ripening, and this sudden spurt or a rise or spike or a surge in rate of respiration is called as respiratory climactic. Okay, ripened oranges induce, this is what we learnt in the beginning, isn't it? So it's very nice to build a story around it. Imagine you have a bag of unripe bananas, you keep ripe orange in that. Probably the ripened orange will stimulate the ripening of the bananas because it is releasing a volatile substance called ethylene. A very commonly asked question is, which is the gaseous hormone in plant? It is ethylene. And you can see how when ethylene is synthesized in the plant, the fruits become riper and riper faster. But if there is no ethylene synthesis, say you have blocked the gene responsible for the synthesis of ethylene through some genetic engineering mechanism, then you can see that you can harvest the green tomatoes itself. You can you can prevent the tomatoes from ripening. You can keep them for a longer duration. You can enhance their shelf life. Okay. Promotes aging. I told you it has a negative aspect to it also. It promotes senescence and aging of plants, and I told you it also brings about abscission of mature leaves and ripened fruits and flowers. Mostly flowers and fruits are usually abscised. For example, in the case of ethylene, usually when it comes to flowers of cherry plant, thinning of cotton, thinning of cherry, thinning of walnut, in plants like this, it brings about the thinning of the flowers. Okay, so this is a negative thing about ethylene. Triple response. Now for triple response, you can see that there will be, mostly with respect to growth of seedlings, the stem will become thick and they will form a hook and they will start spreading on the lateral side. If the plant has to grow upwards like this, the plant will start growing on the horizontal side. Now you can see this picture, you will understand how the plant or the seedling which is growing upwards over here, as you start treating it with more and more ethylene, how it has formed a curve. The apical region of the stem becomes curved, hook like, and see how it is bending downwards and it starts growing horizontally. This is called the triple response, which is one of the very important features of ethylene. It induces potato tubers to sprout. You have seen eyes on potato tubers, which are nodes from which new plants can emerge. That sprouting is induced by ethylene. It also breaks seed dormancy, very important. It helps in germination of groundnut seeds. That is, groundnut seeds which you are storing in a container, they are not germinating, but if you place them under the influence of ethylene, in no time they will germinate. That is because ethylene has, just like gibberellin, it breaks bud and seed dormancy, and because it breaks bud dormancy, it is capable of causing sprouting of potato tubers. All seeds germinating at one time to be harvested together, and so it's very important that you can control the germination of seeds. If you know that the time has come to allow your seeds to germinate, you can germinate them and you can harvest them together and you can reap the benefits, because I told you, you can germinate the seeds and you can use it in the malting process to enhance the alcohol content of the malt that is brewed using certain alcohol producing yeast, isn't it? So this malting process is also enhanced here because it induces the breakage of the seed dormancy. Internode elongation. I told you rice plants has completely submerged in flooded fields. You must have seen in rural areas when you're on a tour or something that the fields are entirely flooded with water, and that's why during rainy season the rice plants are basically sowed, isn't it? And then the rice plants have to emerge from the water level. That happens because of internode elongation and the elongation of the leaf stalk or the petiole. This is also important for aquatic plants because aquatic plants have to come up to the surface of water, and then some of them like water lily and eichhornia, they flower above the surface or level of water, and that is possible because of ethylene. Formation of root hair and root growth, I have already discussed about it, and thus it increases the yield in crops. And what are the applications of it? It is also known to induce flowering in pineapple, and pineapple is an inflorescence. It is a group of florets, so it will make sure that all the flowers in pineapple will start producing fruits at the same time. So it synchronizes the fruit set and synchronizes flowering in pineapple. It also brings about flowering, please remember, it also brings about flowering in case of mango plant, and it also stimulates development of female flowers in cucumber. So we say feminization in cucumber is because of ethylene. It also increases feminization and accelerates abscission, and abscission in case of cherry, in fruits of cherry, cotton, I told you thinning of cotton, cherry and walnut is because of ethylene. The last hormone that we are going to, the last plant growth regulator that we are going to discuss is abscisic acid, which is an entirely a growth inhibitor. So we cannot call it as a growth promoter at all. It is a growth inhibitor because it has majorly certain growth inhibiting properties that we will discuss about it. It was discovered itself for its role of abscission. Abscission is parts which get cut off and which fall off from the plant body, and dormancy, it induces seed dormancy, and that's how it allows the plant to overcome stressful condition. Now the seeds do not germinate because the conditions outside, there's not enough oxygen oxygen, there's not enough water. So as a result, it will help the seeds to overcome this tough condition, that is the stress condition, and therefore abscisic acid is called a stress hormone. It promotes seed dormancy, abscission, promotes bud dormancy, closure of stomata, very important point, closure of stomata. It also enhances the process of aging, and it is also known to promote tolerance of plants. In the case it can overcome, it can help the plants develop a stress tolerance and overcome stressful conditions, and like water stress and saline soil, if the soil has lot of salt and if there is no water available temporarily and such. Okay. It increases, the seed goes into, whenever abscisic acid increases in its content, in its concentration, the seed will not germinate, it will enter into a period called dormancy, where the seed becomes the embryo inside the seed, its metabolic activity decreases, it enters into a state of inactivity, and so when the abscisic acid level is very high in the seed, it will enter into a state of dormancy. It is a suspension of the activities of the embryo that is sitting inside the seed. So here we have just given an illustration of how abscisic acid can bring about closure of stomata. See, the stomata is closing, and this closure of stomata mostly happens during the daytime or when conditions are very dry outside, and that is because the level of abscisic acid in the plant increases. It forms an abscission layer in the stalk of the leaf or the ripe fruits and flowers, and therefore it makes them fall off from the plant body, so that those parts are dropped off from the plant body. So it helps the plant to shed ripened fruits and leaves which are almost dead. Okay. So in temperate regions, it usually helps the buds to go into dormancy to avoid cold condition, and the level of abscisic acid increases during the onset of dormancy. It is because of abscisic acid that the embryo inside the seed has decided to start sleeping. It will not germinate, and that is what is dormancy. Spraying of abscisic acid induces partial closure of stomata to avoid transpiration. So it is usually an anti-transpirant because it will prevent transpiration by closure of stomata. Most of the water is conserved is utilized. So if a plant is not losing enough water vapor to transpiration, then it can make use of that water for the process of photosynthesis. We know that water splitting happens during non-cyclic photophosphorylation. ABA is known to promote senescence, that we already discussed. It leads to abscission, that is so that the plant organ, like for example a mature fruit or a leaf, is dropped off from the plant body. It is known to promote tolerance, and that's why we called abscisic acid as a stress hormone. The next one is photoperiodism. What exactly is the meaning of photoperiodism? Photoperiodism is a condition in which there is flowering only if there is a particular exposure to light. It may be natural light, it may be an artificial light. If you expose the plant for a particular period of light, only then it will flower. That is referred to as photoperiodism. Flowering in response to duration of light or duration of, don't only think that light is only important for flowering. Please remember, it could also be duration of darkness. So flowering as a direct product of exposure to darkness or to light, or the duration of light. When I say duration of light, you are taking into account duration of night or the dark time also. That is referred to as photoperiodism. So based on the light that they require, we can classify plants into short day plants. Please remember, short day plants require longer nights. So it is opposite. Short day plants can also be called as long night plants. Long day plants require short nights. They are referred to as the short night plants. So this is an easy way for you to remember. You can call short day plant as long night plant, long day plant as short night plant. Day neutral plants, they don't really care about how much daylight is there, or how many hours they're exposed to night or no light or darkness. They don't really care for flowering. But short day plants, always remember to switch this in your mind. When I say short day, you must say, okay, they require longer nights and shorter day. Long day, longer days and shorter nights. Okay. So short day plant requires an illumination that does not exceed the critical period. Like I said, short day is a longer night. There will be a critical period of illumination. That is, the illumination means the amount of light that you must give. And one important thing is, if you go beyond this duration of light, that is beyond the critical duration of light, then it will not flower. So you have to make sure that the plant is given light below the critical period. So below the time, say for example, if I say that you give the plant a light for about 4 hours, 4 hours is the critical period, if you say, because it is a short day plant, you have to make sure that the light that you give to the plant, or the time during which the plant is exposed to sunlight, it does not exceed 4 hours. It should be below that 4 hours. Okay, if it goes beyond that 4 hours, then what is going to happen? It is not going to flower. So tobacco, xanthium and sugarcane are example for short day plants. Long day plants is if I say that the plant flowers at, say if I give you the critical period is 6 hours, then you have to always make sure that the amount, the duration of light given to the plant should be more than 6 hours. So it should exceed the critical photo period. What is the critical photo period in this case? 6 hours. That means below 6 hours, if you give it light, it will not flower. For you to make the plant flower, you have to give it a light for a duration of more than 6 hours. So remember, for every plant there is a specific critical photo period. Like in short day plant I told you 4 hours, in long day plant I've given you 6 hours. If you give it light only beyond 6 hours, more than 6 hours, only then it will flower. It wants longer day and it wants shorter nights. That is one way to remember it, longer day. So one definition is, if you provide illumination that exceeds the critical photo period, then only it will flower, like in the case of Hyoscyamus niger. Day neutral plants, they don't care much about, they show no variation in responses to light duration, and they flower after a specific period of vegetative growth. After attaining a certain stage of growth and maturity, they are ready to flower. They don't really care about the time, they don't really care about the duration of light or darkness. Like for example, you have the balsam plant, Impatiens balsamina, and tomato plant. So here they've given the critical, let me take the critical photo period as 6 hours for long day plant, because it's longer, it needs more daylight. Now for a short day plant, let me say it needs only 2 hours of daylight. Okay, so when does it flower? It flowers above 6 hours. So for you to allow this plant to flower, you have to give it light for more than 6 hours, 6 hours being the critical photo period in this particular example. For you to ensure that the plant has to flower, let me make it same 4 hours as I had taught you in the explanation. For you to make this plant flower, you have to give it light for less than 4 hours. If you give it for more than 4 hours, there will be no flowering. So always make sure in a long day plant, you have to exceed the light duration must exceed the critical photo period. In short day plant, the light duration must not exceed the critical photo period. Did you understand? Because short day, they want lesser light and more darkness. Long day require more light and lesser darkness. So for long day, you have to give it light for more than 6 hours in this example. It should exceed the 6 hours bracket, which is the critical photo period. Here it should not go beyond 4 hours bracket, which is the critical photo period. So long day plants flower when you expose them to light which exceeds the critical photo period, and short day plants will flower when you will flower only when the light is below a critical photo period, whereas nothing of it matters for a day neutral plant. They have identified that probably the leaves are the eyes of the plant, like how we detect, I'm just giving you a very silly, a weird example here, like how you detect light with your eye. Probably the leaves have some kind of a sense organ to detect the variation in the light, that is during the daytime and during the night time, and this perception, there is something probably released by the leaf with some active principle which may reach all the way to the stem apical meristem, and which will allow the shoot apex to take shape, to differentiate into a floral primordium, to start differentiating either into an inflorescence axis or into a solitary flower. So not really, they're not eyes as such, but I just gave you an example like how you can detect light with your eye. Probably leaves are the sense organs in the case of plant. It is considered, like I told you, once the leaf detects the light, the duration of the light, whether the duration is greater than the critical photo period in long day plant, or whether the light duration is lesser than the critical photo period in the case of in the case of short day plant, everything is detected by the leaf. It will release a floral substance. Actually, there is a particular name given to this. It is called a phytochrome, but I'm not going to introduce you to that here. Okay, it's not necessary here. So it releases a flowering substance that migrates to the leaves, and then it reaches the epiphysis, which induces the flowering during the appropriate photo period. Like I told you, please bear in mind, for a long day period, you need light duration which exceeds the critical photo period. For a short day plant, you require light duration which is much below the critical photo period. It should not exceed the critical photo period. That means long day plant requires more daylight and short day plant requires less daylight. Okay, and I also told you the alternate way of looking at it. Long day requires shorter night, so more illumination, more than the critical period. Short day plant requires longer night, less illumination, less than the critical photo period. They have not identified, has not been isolated, hence it remains a hypothesis, but there have been certain studies which suggest that there are certain pigment molecules which are called phytochromes which could play an important role in this particular, but it is still a hypothesis because they have not isolated it entirely. What is vernalization? It is the requirement of some plants. They require a treatment of low temperature to produce flowers and germination of seeds. If they don't go through winter, you have to sow them before winter. They have to expose the cold temperature. They have to be exposed to the cold temperature of winter. Only then on the arrival of spring, these plants will flower. So for them to be able to flower, for them to be able to germinate their seeds, they have to go through a cold season, and this is what is called vernalization. In plants like wheat and barley, there are two varieties, one that flowers in the winter and one that flowers in the spring. Now I told you that the spring variety is planted and the winter variety is planted in the autumn. Autumn is the beginning of winter in most cases. So what happens here in the winter variety is, because it has to go through the winter, it is usually sown in autumn. So it goes through the cold months of the winter and then it can only flower once it has gone through the cold months. That is what is the winter variety that we saw. The seeds have to be sowed much before winter, that is during the autumn season itself. Biennials are those which have a vegetative growth. See, biennials are those plants which grow, which live only for 2 years. In 1 year they show vegetative growth, and then during their vegetative growth, after going through a tough winter, a cold month, only then in the next year they will start flowering. So 1 year they go through vegetative growth, and then after winter they start flowering, and this enables the plant to have sufficient time to mature and avoid. So what happens during the winter probably is, you are not allowing the plant, why it is waiting for the spring season, why it requires some cold treatment, is probably because the plant is taking some amount of sufficient time to prevent premature reproductive development and to undergo sufficient maturity in terms of its vegetative or juvenile growth before it is actually mature enough to start flowering. Okay, so with this we complete this particular synopsis for the chapter plant growth and development. Thank you.